Mina Murray's Journal, 24 July, Whitby. Lucy met me at the station, looking sweeter and lovelier than ever, and we drove up to the house at the Crescent, in which they have rooms. This is a lovely place. The little river, the Esk, runs through a deep valley, which broadens out as it comes near the harbor. A great viaduct runs across, with high piers, through which the view seems somehow further away than it really is. The valley is beautifully green, and it is so steep that when you are on the highland on either side, you look right across it, unless you are near enough to see down. The houses of the old town and the side away from us are all red-roofed and seem piled up one over the other anyhow, like the pictures we see of Nuremberg. Right over the town is the ruin of Whitby Abbey, which was sacked by the Danes, and which is the scene of part of Marmion, where the girl was built up in the wall. It is a most noble ruin of immense size, and full of beautiful and romantic bits. There is a legend that a white lady is seen in one of the windows. Between it and the town there is another church, the parish one, round which is a big graveyard, all full of tombstones. This is, to my mind, the nicest spot in Whitby, for it lies right over the town and has a full view of the harbor and all up the bay to where the headland called Kettleness stretches out into the sea. It descends so steeply over the harbor that part of the bank has fallen away and some of the graves have been destroyed. In one place, part of the stonework of the graves stretches out over the sandy pathway far below. There are walks with seats beside them through the churchyard, and people go and sit there all day long, looking at the beautiful view and enjoying the breeze. I shall come and sit here often myself and work. Indeed, I am writing now with my book on my knees and listening to the talk of 3 old men who are sitting beside me. They seem to do nothing all day but sit here and talk. The harbor lies below me, with, on the far side, one long granite wall stretching out into the sea, with a curve outwards at the end of it, in the middle of which is a lighthouse. A heavy seawall runs along outside of it. On the near side, the seawall makes an elbow crooked inversely, and its end, too, has a lighthouse. Between the 2 piers, there is a narrow opening into the harbor, which then suddenly widens. It is nice at high water, but when the tide is out, it shoals away to nothing, and there is merely the stream of the Esk, running between banks of sand, with rocks here and there. Outside the harbor, on this side, there rises for about half a mile a great reef, the sharp of which runs straight out from behind the south lighthouse. At the end of it is a buoy with a bell, which swings in bad weather and sends in a mournful sound on the wind. They have a legend here that when a ship is lost, bells are heard out at sea. I must ask the old man about this. He is coming this way. He is a funny old man. He must be awfully old, for his face is gnarled and twisted like the bark of a tree. He tells me that he is nearly 100, and that he was a sailor on the Greenland fishing fleet when Waterloo was fought. He is, I am afraid, a very skeptical person, for when I asked him about the bells at sea and the white lady at the Abbey, he said very brusquely, "I wouldn't fash mysel' about them, miss. Them things are all wore out. Mind, I don't say that they never was, but I do say that they wasn't in my time. They be all very well for comers and trippers and the like, but not for a nice young lady like you. Them feet folks from York and Leeds, that be always eatin' cured herrins and drinkin' tea and lookin' out to buy cheap jet, would creed aught. I wonder mysel', who'd be bothered tellin' lies to them, even the newspapers, which is full of fool talk." I thought he would be a good person to learn interesting things from, so I asked him if he would mind telling me something about the whale fishing in the old days. He was just settling himself to begin when the clock struck 6, whereupon he labored to get up and said, "I must gang again words home now, miss. My granddaughter doesn't like to be kept waitin' when the tea is ready, for it takes me time to crammel-aboon the grease, for there be a many of 'em, and miss, I lack belly timber sarely by the clock." He hobbled away, and I could see him hurrying, as well as he could, down the steps. The steps are a great feature on the place. They lead from the town to the church. There are hundreds of them. I do not know how many, and they wind up in a delicate curve. The slope is so gentle that a horse could easily walk up and down them. I think they may originally have had something to do with the abbey. I shall go home too. Lucy went out visiting with her mother, and as they were only duty calls, I did not go. First August. I came up here an hour ago with Lucy, and we had a most interesting talk with my old friend, and the two others who always come and join him. He is evidently the Sir Oracle of them, and I should think must have been in his time a most dictatorial person. He will not admit anything and downfaces everybody. If he can't out-argue them, he bullies them, and then takes their silence for agreement with his views. Lucy was looking sweetly pretty in her white lawn frock. She has got a beautiful color since she has been here. I noticed that the old men did not lose any time in coming and sitting near her when we sat down. She is so sweet with old people. I think they all fell in love with her on the spot. Even my old man succumbed and did not contradict her, but gave me double share instead. I got him on the subject of the legends, and he went off at once into a sort of sermon. I must try to remember it and put it down. It be all full talk, lock, stock, and barrel. That's what it be, and nought else. These bands and wafts, and bogos, and barguests, and bogles, and alimentum is only fit to set barons and dizzy women in Belderin. They be nowt but airblebs. They and all grimes and signs and warnin's be all invented by parsons and ilsome birk bodies and railway trouters to skeer and skinner halflins, and to get folks to do something that they don't other incline to. It makes me ireful to think of 'em. Why, it's them that, not content with printin' lies on paper and preaching them out of pulpits, does want to be cuttin' them on the tombstones. Look here, all around you, and what ain't ye will? All them steens, holding up their heads, as well as they can out of their pride, is a caint simply tumbling down with the weight of the lies wrote on them. Here lies the body, or sacred to the memory, wrote on all of them, and yet in nigh half of them there bean't no bodies at all, and the memories of them bean't cared a pinch of snuff about, much less sacred. Lies, all of them, nothing but lies of one kind or another. My gog. But it'll be a quire scouterment at the day of judgment, when they come tumbling up in their death sarks, all juped together, and trying to drag their tombsteins with them to prove how good they was, some of them tremblin' and ditherin', with their hands still dozened and slippery from lyin' in the sea, that they can't even keep their grip of them. I could see, from the old fellow's self-satisfied air, and the way in which he looked round for the approval of his cronies, that he was showing off, so I put in a word to keep him going. "Oh, Mr. Swalls, you can't be serious. Surely those tombstones are not all wrong." "Yablins, there may be a poorish few not wrong, savin', where they make out the people too good. For there be folk that do think a balm bowl be like the sea, if only it be their own. The whole thing be only lies. Now look you here. You come here a stranger, and you see this Kirkgarth." I nodded, for I thought it better to assent. Though I did not quite understand his dialect, I knew it had something to do with the church. He went on, "And you consate that all these steens be a boon folk, and be happed here, snod and snog?" I assented again. "Then that be just where the lie comes in. Why, they be scores of these lay beds that be tombed as old Dunn's bacca-box on Friday night." He nudged one of his companions, and they all laughed. "And my gog, how could they be otherwise? Look at that one, the aftest abaft, the beer bank. Read it." I went over and read, "Edward Spenceley, Master Mariner, murdered by pirates off the coast of Andres. April 1854, age 30. When I came back, Mr. Swales went on. Who brought him home, I wonder, to hap him here, murdered off the coast of Andries? And you can say that his body lay under? Why, I could name ye a dozen whose bones lie in the Greensland seas above. He pointed northwards, or where the currents may have drifted them. There be the sterns around ye. Ye can, with your young eyes, read the small print of the lies from here. This Braithwaite Lowry, I knew his father, lost in the Lively off Greenland in 20, or Andrew Windhouse, drowned in the same seas in 1777, or John Paxton, drowned off Cape Farewell a year later, or old John Rawlings, whose grandfather sailed with me, drowned in the Gulf of Finland in 50. Do ye think that all these men will have to make a rush to Whitby when the trumpet sounds? I have me anthems aboot it. I tell ye that when they got here, they'd be jomlin' and jostlin' one another that way, that oo'd be like a fight up on the ice in the old days when we'd be on one another from daylight to dark, and trying to tie up our cuts by the aurora borealis. This was evidently local pleasantry, for the old man cackled over it, and his cronies joined in with gusto. But, I said, surely you are not quite correct, for you start on the assumption that all the poor people, or their spirits, will have to take their tombstones with them on the Day of Judgment. Do you think that will be really necessary? Well, what else be they tombstones for? Answer me that, miss. To please their relatives, I suppose? To please their relatives, you suppose? This he said with intense scorn. How will it pleasure their relatives to know that lies is wrote over them, and that everybody in the place knows that they be lies? He pointed to a stone at our feet, which had been laid down as a slab, on which the seat was rested, close to the edge of the cliff. Read the lies on that through stone, he said. The letters were upside down to me from where I sat, but Lucy was more opposite to them, so she leant over and read. Sacred to the memory of George Cannon, who died in the hope of a glorious resurrection on July 29th, 1873, falling from the rocks at Kettleness. This tomb was erected by his sorrowing mother to her dearly beloved son. He was the only son of his mother, and she was a widow. Really, Mr. Swales, I don't see anything very funny in that. She spoke her comment very gravely and somewhat severely. You don't see aught funny? Ha ha! But that's because Yagon the sorrowing mother was a hellcat that hated him because he was a crook, a regular lamenter he was. And he hated her so that he committed suicide in order that she mightn't get an insurance she put on his life. He blew nigh the top of his head off with an old musket that they had for scaring crows with. 'Twarn't for crows then, for it brought the Cleggs and the dwarfs to him. That's the way he fell off the rocks. And as to hopes of a glorious resurrection, I've often heard him say mysel that he hoped he'd go to hell, for his mother was so pious that she'd be sure to go to heaven, and he didn't want to addle where she was. Now isn't that steen at any rate? He hammered it with his stick as he spoke. A pack of lies? And won't it make Gabriel keckle when Geordie comes pantin' at the grease with the tomstein balanced on his hump and asks to be took as evidence? I did not know what to say, but Lucy turned the conversation as she said, rising up, "Oh, why did you tell us of this? It is my favorite seat, and I cannot leave it, and now I find I must go on sitting over the grave of a suicide. That won't harm ye, my pretty, and it may make poor Geordie gladsome to have so trim a lass sitting on his lap. That won't hurt ye. Why, I've sat here off and on for nigh 20 years past, and it hasn't done me no harm. Don't ye fash about them as lies under ye, for that doesn't lie there either. It'll be time for ye to be getting scart when you see the tombsteins all run away with, and the place as bare as a stubble field. There's the clock, and I must gang. My service to ye, ladies." And off he hobbled. Lucy and I sat a while, and it was all so beautiful before us that we took hands as we sat, and she told me all over again about Arthur and their coming marriage. That made me just a little heartsick, for I haven't heard from Jonathan for a whole month. The same day, I came up here alone, for I am very sad. There was no letter for me. I hope there cannot be anything the matter with Jonathan. The clock has just struck 9. I see the lights scattered all over the town, sometimes in rows where the streets are, and sometimes singly. They run right up the Esk and die away in the curve of the valley. To my left, the view is cut off by a black line of roof of the old house next to the abbey. The sheep and lambs are bleating in the fields away behind me, and there is a clatter of donkeys' hoofs up the paved road below. The band on the pier is playing a harsh waltz in good time, and further along the quay there is a Salvation Army meeting in a back street. Neither of the bands hears the other, but up here I hear, and I see them both. I wonder where Jonathan is, and if he is thinking of me. I wish he were here.